Thank you so much. Well, raise your hand if you ever climbed a tree in your life. Woohoo! So all of you technically are arbonauts. Astronauts explore outer space. Arbonaut is what I am. I explore the tops of trees, and maybe you do too. So that's kind of exciting. And my case study today starts in the treetops, but in actual fact, this Rachel Carson Center and what all of you are doing, I think, is the path of the future, because you'll see from my work in Ethiopia that scientists need you. We need humanities, we need social sciences to solve the global issues such as deforestation and climate change. It's all about people, and in science they never teach us about people or the history of civilization, admittedly. So I hope you'll think harder about maybe working with scientists in your future, because perhaps that's a good thought to solving some of the world's problems. So this is my past, and I did climb my first tree in Australia in 1979, because my advisor said you need to look at the whole tree, not just the bottom of it. So boy, was I ever scared. But anyway, that's another lecture, another day. The important part about this is that most of my research starts with canopy biodiversity, but in the end I realized that every time I made a new discovery, someone was burning the forest the next year or cutting it down, and I had to change my actions. It wasn't good enough to publish a paper and get tenure and get promoted because you wrote up some new species if you're losing the very habitat. So that's kind of what propelled me into the museum world from academia, and I've gone back and forth a couple times because sometimes we need to talk to other people that aren't scientists. In my case, we need to talk to leaders and politicians and the public, and so this is where I'm working now. The California Academy of Sciences is the largest green roof LEED building in the world. You can come there and traipse around and see all the native wildflowers on the roof, and it's a very good place for us to message to young children age 1, to older people age 91, and maybe even to a couple government officials along the way. And the mission of our museum is explore, explain, and sustain. And like all museums, we've explored and collected things, we've explained them in archives and exhibits, but rarely have we sustained the planet. So now we're all scrambling as museum leaders, as scientists, as environmental historians, hopefully, to think about what is the future? How can we sustain all that we've seen in the past and make sure the future is good for our children and grandchildren? So that's kind of what keeps me awake at night. And in my world of tropical rainforests, I noticed that we've spent millions of dollars on research and hundreds and thousands of hours with our passion to do our research. But guess what? We're losing it. Just last week, they reported that 2017 was the highest ever deforestation in the world of tropical forests, despite everything that we know about how those forests keep us alive. So we really have a lot to do, and very quickly. And I want to propose two thoughts. One is women are rarely in the decision-making table for conservation, so maybe we need to rethink that. And number two, maybe we need different stakeholders to come along, and I want to talk about priests and religion getting involved with science. But my interest in women underlies a lot of what I do, because I did start out in Australia as the only woman in the School of Biological Sciences at Sydney University, and everybody just expected me to bring the baby along and do all the work that they were doing. It was kind of funny. It led to my writing a book about the challenges of being a woman in science. Next, I applied for an expedition with all my French colleagues, and I applied as M. Lowman. Why do you think I didn't use my name, my first name? That's right, because if I had said Margaret Lowman, I wouldn't have gotten in. When I got to this expedition, they were horrified that they let a woman in, so I was the only girl. But I learned a lot of swear words in French. It was great. But all of my career has been this kind of activity, and I had 2 children, and I was a single parent, so I had to take them with me. So my second book, It's a Jungle Up There, is actually co-authored with my 2 kids, because they had the weirdest mom in the world, right? What mom collects tarantulas and measures insect poop and does all these crazy things. So I guess hearing from my kids about what it's like to grow up with a mom scientist is probably more entertaining than hearing from the scientist herself. So we had a lot of adventures through our lives. But I will today focus, instead of women in science, more on this Ethiopia case, because this is an urgent country and case study. Ethiopia, all of you know where it is, of course, is right now at a point where the whole northern half of the country has only 5% or less of its forests left. So we have to really think hard about what's not working. And for a lot of these countries, going to the government is not the solution. There are too many issues with corruption of finance, with inability to understand what really is happening in some of these rural areas. And so Ethiopia has, I hope, a new opportunity to lead the world with a great solution. This is shopping on Saturday in Ethiopia. The women travel maybe 15 miles. Most of them don't have shoes. Rarely do you have an umbrella, but that's really wonderful if you do. And you usually carry your children and you carry your goods and you trade them and then you walk home again. So they really depend on shade as an asset. They need their freshwater springs, which are very tightly linked to their forest. And unfortunately, this is the landscape of Ethiopia. I better point that out because those are the forests that are left in Ethiopia. So you have a subsistence agriculture landscape with very small dots of beautiful green native trees. If you're a bird, that's the only place you go. If you're a pollinator, that's where you're going to have your reproductive cycle. If you're a mammal, of course you're going to be there. So all of their future is locked into these little tiny green dots, which is amazing because, as you can tell, they're disappearing. And the neat thing, though, is in the center is one round building, which is the Coptic Church. The Christian Orthodox priest takes care of all of God's creatures. I, as a scientist, want to conserve biodiversity. So the neat thing is we actually have the same mission. But usually people say to me, you can't work with the church because you're a scientist, and religion and science don't go together. But I believe that they are the solution to Ethiopia's problem, not the government, certainly not the scientists, but hopefully maybe the religious leaders who are highly respected. And some 4 billion people in the world have sacred forests. America is not one of them, admittedly, but my church is surrounded by a parking lot, so that tells you a lot. Unfortunately. But in this case, it is really, really important that everybody values the forests surrounding the church, with a few exceptions. The farmers are hungry, and their children are hungry. So a farmer here cleared part of the church forest, as we call it, and left this poor remaining tree. And this priest of this church forest was explaining to me that 5 years ago, this tree was in his forest. It happens to be called Prunus africanus. It's a cure for prostate cancer. So it's a very special medicinal tree, and he is heartbroken that this farmer has taken some of the church forest because he really didn't understand the importance of not pushing his plow a little bit faster and harder. Meanwhile, the women are walking farther distances as the church forest declines. So do the springs, and they are the ones, of course, responsible for feeding the family, for tending the garden, which needs the pollinators to come out of the forest. And so all of their life is tied up as environmental stewards, but yet they have no voice. The average age for dropping out of school as a girl in rural Ethiopia is 5th grade, and the average age to have your first child is 13. So that kind of really defines, for better or for worse, how much influence the women actually have. But water is everything, and water is associated with the trees. So what are we going to do about this? We need to call upon the women maybe because they understand the pollinators and they understand the importance of water to their family, but we also need to call upon the leaders of the church and try to think harder about how we can help them make a case for not plowing too much, for not letting your cattle kind of wander in and eat all the seedlings, for not maybe sneaking and getting a couple dead branches for your firewood just because they look like they're extras. When you have no aerial maps, when you have no computers, no cell phones, mostly no electricity, you never get to see a picture like this. So as a child, maybe living out here, or even as a priest living in here, there's not any understanding that the whole rest of the landscape is devoid of trees and that actually half of your forest has been plowed under. So this was to me an opportunity. How could I use my gifts as a Western scientist with technology, with social media, with the ability to just simply look at Google Earth and maybe translate a message to the priests who are the trusted stewards of this community. So that's what happened. I ended up partnering with the only other biologist in northern Ethiopia. It's the first time in my life where being the only girl was an advantage, because some of the priests, I guess they made a joke that they thought I was some angel coming out of heaven. And I did workshops, and I thought whatever it takes, they need to listen, and listen they did. We had a generator, we had an old sheet for a slide projector. I am so used to giving talks without this wonderful technology. In fact, my mother said, this is the first time you've been invited to a country with flush toilets, so yay for Germany. In any case, what I had to tell them was something you all know, but they never knew that forests are the center of their pollinators' life cycle, that forests give them their oxygen and gas exchange. Forests are the only source of their medicines, their natural dyes for all their church murals. The roots provide soil conservation and also make the soil. All of these scientific concepts that we learn in 7th grade, you never can get if you never had a science class before, that their firewood can be managed sustainably, and even coffee grown in the understory. And that, of course, as we all know, their water is so linked to staying clean when they have springs that are in the middle of their church forests. And of course, for them, they do know and appreciate that this is a very spiritual place for them. I did some work with the Max Planck Institute. There's a lab there that does animal movements, and we found out that some of your storks actually roost in these little church forests in Ethiopia in the winter. So there's a broader importance value to this amazing forest than even just the Ethiopians themselves. So of their own volition, after my workshops, and every year I go back and talk to about 150 new priests, they decided they could take the stones out of their fields. The farmers love that. They can build these walls. They've got plenty of labor. They can keep the cattle out from eating all the seedlings of the next generation. They can make a sacred boundary that everybody respects, and they can save their church forest. So the fabulous thing is, this was their idea, not mine, but to really seal the deal, I try to give them a donation every time a priest builds a wall around his church. I say his because there are no women priests, that's another story. But anyway, the neat thing is we now have identified the 40 highest biodiversity church forests in Ethiopia, and 20 are walled as of this year, and we have 20 more to go. And it's just an incredible landscape, but you can see here this brand new wall. This is the most recent one surrounding this church forest that has the highest bird biodiversity of anywhere in Ethiopia, is now at least a genetic library. It is not a corridor that will expand tomorrow, but it's very easy to take those walls down and add to it once their agricultural technology catches up with what they really need in terms of how they can harvest from their landscape. So we're really excited about this progress, but it's very slow and there are no government supports. The government wants to give them eucalyptus to plant, which is the enemy tree, the priests call it. It takes 4 times more water. In a country with valuable water, you don't want to waste it that way because nothing native lives in the eucalypt, so that's a big mistake. And my other challenge, in addition to maybe finishing the wall project, is thinking about the next generation of priests. We have now a whole dedicated group of senior priests who all want walls, which is fantastic, but in 20 years' time, these will be the new priests. And what do you do with kids that have no computers, no posters in their school, not one single book in their whole life, and mostly they wear the blanket they sleep in to school? So I need your help. I would love to get ideas for good environmental education programs. Here's one that I started because I'm a mom, I guess, but I've been making t-shirts with their language, which is called Amharic, and giving the pollinators on the shirt, because the kids can wear their own field guide. If you give them a piece of paper, it probably gets burned in mom's cook stove, but if you give them a shirt, they're so proud to wear it, and maybe that's one way of starting them to learn about their own biodiversity. I've also written this book. It's in Amharic. Anybody here speak Amharic? Love to have you come up and read it. Oh, but we'll put it in the library. It's in English too. You can buy it on Amazon.com, and every time someone buys an English copy, we print free an Amharic copy that I take and distribute, because you can only imagine how wonderful it is to give a kid their first book at age 16 or 15. So it's, for me, a tearful experience. But this book tells them the value of a tree, because they don't get that in their school necessarily. And hopefully it has a girl fictitiously as the heroine who's planting trees in Ethiopia. And that's my thought, is trying to provide these environmental education tools for kids that can't do the kinds of things that we in the Western world can do for our own school kids. Here's my soul sister. I'm funding a girl from Ethiopia to get her master's degree in women's studies and forestry at the University of Maine. Again, all of these little baby steps towards creating role models for the people over there. And in summary, I think in this case, conservation with diverse stakeholders, not traditional kinds of government people or big NGOs that never really go into the countryside, is really working. If we can get the women more engaged, it will be even better. In this case, I think technology, the science helps, but the trust building, which is what you all are about, the humanities, the social science element of this project are really what is making it successful. And right now, it's $237 of donations for us to finish our project. That's about 200,000 euros, isn't it? It's very cheap. So anybody wants to write the check today, I'd be so happy to take it. And maybe we can solve this overnight. But it is a doable project, and I'm excited that by 2020 we will have the biodiversity of Ethiopia a little bit better off than it is today or yesterday. And yes, if we can engage girls, I think that would be really great. Thank you very much.